How's it going, everyone? It is me, the Lone Vault Wanderer, and I'm here with
Salutations, everybody. It is Matty here.
our second video for the day. We're just smashing them out,
I'm looking forward to
and
this.
we're talking about Borderlands. So Borderlands. I see. This is the thing.
This is
why
what
we
happens.
don't record. We're talking about BioShock. Great start. And we're talking about the next potential BioShock and where this game could be set. A lot of people have their ideas, and we want to talk about where we'd like to see or where BioShock could be set for the next game. So, Maddie, how about you start with your number one top idea where you would like the next BioShock to be set?
So we dove into this on the podcast. Thought it'd be a good idea to really get into some other ideas we had spinning around our head. One that I had that I saw, I'll admit, I saw it online and I started thinking about it more and more. And I was like, you know what? This would actually be kind of cool. And Lo made a great connection to a movie about this. And I was like, oh shit, it's less serious now. But a bubble city. Now I'm not talking like Squidward's house floating up to the top of the sea type bubble city. I'm talking like there is a dome. We're going to talk to Simpsons movie for a sec. There's a dome over this city and it's separated from the rest of the world. And I think that would be really interesting.
Great.
Because
you could explain that in so many different ways, right?
Exactly, because you know it's always the theme of BioShock is always about that utopia going to a dystopia, trying to escape from modern society and essentially crafting your own, right? So what would be interesting is just literally putting a bubble over it and you're still living in that same society, not really away from it, you're still in it. And like I said, I mean, we could really rely on the Simpsons movie here for a second and say like how they got the supplies in the Simpsons movie into the dome in the same way. You know, there are traders and importers and stuff, but there's just this complete disassociation from the rest of the world, and obviously shit goes wrong inside this bubble.
Well, exactly, and you can also explain it in a way where, let's say, some sort of government, some sort of corporation actually traps people within the bubble, so they're not confining themselves, you know, of their own volition. Usually, you know, with BioShock 1, you had Andrew Ryan say, I want to create this underwater city, and you had similar with Comstock and Columbia and Infinite. What if this BioShock was people are trapped within the city, but they make do? They make do with the dome. They somehow get supplies in.
They get
and
trapped and they panic and they're like, "Oh wait, this isn't too bad." And then it turns out
actually pretty cool.
Bad, you know, and they catch on to something going on with the government.
Create some sort of uprising too. It could be a really, really cool story.
Oh yeah, because you know that's one thing that was awesome about BioShock Infinite is that you saw the start of all that uprising. Like you saw the life in the city when you first arrived.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, I guess I wouldn't say you saw the start of the uprising. You really caused it. And then you kind of walk into it later on in the game. So I thought that actually would be really interesting in a bubble city.
No, it'd be awesome.
We
just
need
to see how people are coping.
We need a more serious name, though. We can't just call it Bubble City. That's
Dome City.
Dome City, yeah. Yeah, because Bubble City is like, come on, what are you, 5? So yeah, Dome City.
We'd think of something really, really cool. But I love that idea. I mean, even though the Simpsons movie was average, I liked that aspect of it.
You thought it was average? I thought that movie was funny.
It was only funny when you saw Bart Simpson's penis, but anyways.
Yeah, I was just thinking of that scene. I was like, I'm not going to say anything.
That was great. But the next idea that I'll bring up, and this is something we talked about on the podcast, but we can flesh it out here, is the whole having an underground city. We've been under the water, we've been in the air. Having an underground city could be cool. Now, I think it was Carrick that drew references to Fallout and there being vaults, etc. That's not really what I had in mind. I mean, I was thinking like underground caverns and diamond mines and underground volcanoes. Like you could really experiment with some awesome settings and some awesome colors in that city. And it could be similar to kind of Andrew Ryan, you know, they wanted to create a utopian city that went to shit or whatever it is, but it would be a really, really cool setting that fits with BioShock, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it would be interesting if when they went into these underground caverns, they found some type of rock that turned into a renewable resource to allow them to continue living there. Because one thing about BioShock is that they always explain literally everything that happens in the universe. So it's not just they went into underground, they just started living there. You know, they got to explain how they're somehow still able to continue life down there. Like I said, in BioShock 1, it was really cool finding out about how they planted trees down there, and that's what's providing the oxygen for the rest of
That was such
Rapture.
a great thing, yeah.
Right? And, like, you look outside the window and you see, like, trees inside these tubes specifically with little pipes going into different sections of Rapture. So, you know, that type of explanation is definitely necessary. So, let's say it is underground. One thing that we should talk about with all of these settings is when do we want it set, right? Because like, do we still, it's got to be in the 1960s or ish, around there, 1950s, 1960s.
It's got to have that theme. I completely agree. I guess, where do you have it set in relation to, and I know the story is so convoluted, there are different worlds, etc., but where do you have it set in relation to Rapture, and when do you have it set in relation to Columbia? Or does this game, because it is set in such a confined setting, just keep the 1940s, 50s theme, and then just don't have any like, you can have Easter eggs, but have absolutely no reference or connections to Rapture and Columbia.
Imagine you're born into this society. This is kind of in my theme with this. Is in fact, instead of entering it, you're born into it, and you think, because of the aesthetics, because of the setup, you know, it's the 1940s stuff, because they've been confined for so long, they haven't updated what their music culture is and stuff. And then you exit, and it turns out, you know, whatever you get out of this dystopian society now, it turns out it's like thousands of years in the future. Like super future.
Right.
That would be interesting.
I don't know if you ever watched the movie. I think it was called The Island, where they were kind of like in this corporation trapped them. I think they were clones or something like that, and they were being bred to be able to have a new body for someone else. So when they died, they could be, I guess, transported into that new body. But when they escape, they find out about this new world and stuff like that. That could be really cool if someone was confined and that's all they knew. And every time maybe they asked about the new world, or where was this music track came from? Who created this? And people try and explain that away, but then you find out about it.
You escape this cavern area, you find out, like, instead of like, oh, look how much has changed, no one's there. It's just completely empty.
That would be crazy.
Right? And everyone has left this planet because it's dying, and literally you were like the only civilization there. And now you gotta find your way to another planet in the next game or something like that. That would be insane.
Oh, you know what? That leads really nicely into the next potential setting. Because it is a BioShock game, right? It has its roots and origins in System Shock. And I guess the question is the next place for BioShock to take place, is it space? Is it somewhere on a new planet or a space station? I know it's similar to System Shock, and it's also similar to Prey, which we just had, which is also influenced by System Shock and BioShock. But would it still be cool to have a BioShock game set in space?
Yeah, I mean, BioShock anything's pretty cool, but you know, it's just, like you've said, we've seen a lot of these games set on these space stations, these derelict space stations that, you know, things go, there's an experiment and things go wrong. We've seen a lot of it before, so for it to be set in space, I think it would have to be super unique and really have something that made it just not sci-fi space kind of things. You know, it had to be something really different and unique, I feel.
See, I have an idea, right? I mean, I mentioned this in the podcast where it could be this kind of entrepreneur that's saying, I want to be the first person to set up a settlement on Mars or some sort of planet, right? But because of the oxygen levels there, they create a dome on Mars, and that's how they survive. So it's not really like they kind of create this utopian city. I don't know if you ever watched, ever played Soma, but there is this kind of utopian place at the. Just a spoiler. Anyways, it's a nice place. Lovely trees, you know, clear skies and all of that. So you could kind of have that on Mars, and maybe you don't know about the outside world on Mars, and then you find out about it. I don't know. Like it's space, but it's not really, right? It's kind of confined.
Yeah, no, that would be cool. A different planet in general would be really interesting to find out. Like, you left the planet Earth for another one because how bad things were getting, or how free you were desperate to be. One idea that I did read online, kind of going off the space idea, was that a lot of people were saying, like, set it during the Cold War, during the space race or something, and have it be almost like a communist type of setting. I think that would be really interesting too, like a Soviet Union space base or something along those lines. That would definitely be a really interesting idea as well. But it's just, once again, for me, it boils down to how do you make it look interesting and appealing and different? Because, like I said, these space stations, these space bases, they all, you know, look the same no matter what, whether it was
I know what you
Prey
mean.
or Wolfenstein The New Order when you're on the Nazi space base. You know, they all really, and not in a bad way, they look cool, they're fun to explore, but they look the same. So what do you do to make space really interesting?
Yeah, and the only way really is to kind of create your, like, to solve all the oxygen problems, etc., is to create this kind of giant building or some sort of structure to explain that away. And then within that structure itself, it just looks completely different, you know?
Yeah. No, I think it could. Here's the thing, is that all these settings could work. They just need the right ideas and context in place to really flush it out.
But I guess the next question is, all right, do we have to go to a new setting? Is there still space for BioShock's story, I guess, to be expounded upon within the context of Rapture or within the context of Columbia? Would you like to see us return to either of those two settings?
Well, with Rapture, we've had 2 games there, and it's not that we haven't seen all of Rapture. Like an open world Rapture game, that would be amazing, and really get a feel for life before things went wrong, like a true one.
Definitely.
We get a little taste of it in Burial at Sea, you know, kind of, but I think, personally, even in Columbia, I don't know if there was room to tell more story of the city there. I mean, some people say that it wasn't as well flushed out as Rapture, and I can understand why, because, you know, Rapture's had 2 games dedicated to it. I just feel like it would show almost a lack of creativity, a lack of wanting to take us somewhere new. That's just my 2 cents, though. I think a lot of people would really welcome the idea of going back to Rapture or Columbia, because they're such fantastic settings. There's really nothing quite like them.
No, they're really brilliant settings, but I guess the problem is when you say, all right, we're set in Rapture or we're set in Columbia, you're instantly tying yourself down to Ken Levine and the past. Like,
true.
There's no other... I guess this is kind of the problem that BioShock 2 had, or at least some people had with BioShock 2. Ken Levine created Rapture, Ken Levine created Columbia, and I guess the worry is if another developer tried to go back to those settings and mess everything up and you know, tell more stories and tell more lore, because it has to happen. You can't just base absolutely everything on what Ken Levine already created. You have to tell something new for the game to work. Then maybe you're not doing justice to what Ken Levine envisioned. And it's always going to have those, I guess, anchors to the past, where maybe the best thing for this new studio is just to branch out completely and to do something new, so they don't always have people judging them against what Ken Levine did.
Yeah, exactly. Breaking free, I think, is really important for the series to establish. I wouldn't say an identity, but for the studio, rather, to get its own identity. Because, like you said, it's very much tied to Ken Levine and just how well tied together this entire universe is and how ridiculously mind-blowing this series is consistently. So, yeah, like I said, I think I love Rapture, I love Columbia, I'd love to see an open-world setting for both these games, but... Also, with that said, would that even work? Because I think what's really special about both these games is that they have not like hubs or anything, they're just levels. And it brings you back to a more classic time. And what's cool about BioShock is I was actually watching the documentary that came with BioShock, the collection.
Yeah,
Ken
that's
Levine
really cool.
was saying how each area, each level, they made sure they had like a theme and they rolled with it. And I think... that's one thing that we have to keep in mind too, is that how many more themes can you implement into Rapture, right? You know, and how
and Rapture is only a set space. You know, you can't just keep adding more rooms and adding more levels.
And just saying, hey, by the way, this whole, you know, they went back to Rapture and they resurrected the city and it went to shit again. Like that doesn't really work. So, you know,
there are problems with that. Like, you know, it would be nice in terms of nostalgia to go back to those settings, but as you said, we've had 2 games technically in Rapture. We kind of touch Rapture in BioShock Infinite DLC. I do think, not necessarily in terms of story, because I think the story of BioShock ended pretty well, but people are right in saying that with Columbia, they would have, like, I would have liked to have explored that a little bit more, because it was just one game and I didn't feel like we did that enough. So I guess in that regard, there's space to go back to Columbia, but how do you explain that? I know that's exactly the problem.
It's like, what would... I don't know. I feel like, yeah, I'd love to explore it more, because once again, it goes back to, it's such a good setting. It's just, what would you do? What's your purpose there? I mean, you just make like a life sim and live while life is good there, you know? What do you do with that?
And also the problem is as well with trying to touch on any of the previous stories is that because of the way BioShock Infinite, and I guess we know we're at the end of this video almost, so we'll talk about spoilers. The way Infinite ended just leaves the door open for so many possibilities and so many worlds and all of that kind of stuff that it would just be really hard to tell a story there, because you could say, well, what about this other world? And what about, like, it just, it would be so hard. I don't know how I'd do it.
With Infinite's multiple infinite universe idea, that, like you said, it leaves the door open for so many different places. And that's what got me thinking that, you know, will BioShock develop into this series where each entry has the same DNA? For example, I always say this with Final Fantasy. It's got that Magica, you got your Moogles, you got this same DNA, the same things a lot of the time, but it's a different universe. There's a different story to tell, because one thing that we have to consider with all our ideas, whether it was the bubble city, going to space, is how many societies all of a sudden want to up and leave and say screw this and do their own thing within this same universe that Rapture and Infinite were set in, right? So it's like there comes a point where how ridiculous has it become, and it breaks a bit of the disbelief. You know, having two societies secede, one underwater, one in the sky, it's just kind of like a match made in heaven situation. It sounds right, it works just right. But like when you add another one who's decided to go underground, or hey, screw the sky, you see the city flying above Columbia and saying, hey, see you later, we're going to space. You know, I guess that's the other situation where, you know, do you think that's what's going to happen? We're going to start just seeing the same DNA in a different universe because of how Infinite ended up?
I think there's a chance that we could do that, because touching on what Elizabeth was saying about there being infinite universes with infinite possibilities, there would be universes out there that don't have Columbia and that don't have Rapture. So you could still have in that universe isolated someone seceding. I mean, maybe within each of these universes, the common thread is always the fact that there's a society that secedes and does something different. That could be the common thread that links everything. And it's really hard, because I could be mentioning this and you could be talking about this and someone would say, well, it doesn't actually make sense in terms of the lore and story of Infinite, because, you know, time travel and like touchy subjects such as this, such as like having different universes, it's always hard to have a story that makes sense without retconning itself through and through. It's so difficult.
Yeah, exactly.
So I don't know what you do.
I mean,
I really don't.
The thing, though, is that the cities can be roughly the same, but I think it also goes back to themes. Because, you know, with BioShock 1, it was all about objectivism, I believe. I think Infinite was more of a focus on religion. So it's like, do you just, instead of focusing on the setting, do they just kind of pick wherever and then decide, okay, it's about the themes because that's what's going to make the world? Because it's one of those situations where does the world feed off of the plot, or does the plot feed off of the world kind of situation?
And you also have to explain as well, you know, how, because BioShock has to have some sort of powers or ability system. Like, you need to be able to throw out something from your hand, like electricity or fire or whatever it is. And each of those games explain, I guess, whether you think they explain them pretty well, but at least they had a reasoning. You know, Adam in BioShock 1, for instance, that's how they got the superpowers. You'd have to also have something to explain that in the next BioShock game as well. And after a while, you think, well, they just keep coming up with these stupid reasons to justify there being powers in these games, you know?
True. So it's one of those situations where between a rock and a hard place, and they got to come up with ideas fast.
And I think we just have to tie this video up nicely, I think we just have to deal with it. If we want to see more BioShock games, we have to accept the fact that there might be contradictions with what is already established in BioShock, and there's probably no way to explain it fully and properly, and we have to just deal with it.
Well, yeah, I think the surefire way of freeing themselves from it is just saying, okay, we have, you know, in a developer interview, just go, yeah, we're going based off of Infinite. At the end, there's infinite universes, and this is our own universe, and just go from there, and then explain, you know, we'll take it. We want these vigors of these plasmids, whatever you're going to call them this time around. We want those, so just give us a reasoning, a grounded one, of course, but it doesn't have to be crazy, because we know we're going to get them no matter what, because a lot of BioShock is about the power and the gunplay at the same time. So
exactly,
you know, just give us the reasoning and then roll with the setting, and I think they'll be
exactly.
Good.
And we just, I know some people will nitpick, but I think me and probably you as well, we just won't nitpick unless it's really stupid reasoning.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Is that sometimes I think developers will settle a little too much and say like, all right, let's just get to the nitty gritty. It's like, wait, that didn't make sense at all.
Yeah, you need to get from A to B properly. But anyways, this has also been a 20-minute video too. So we've been recording for close to 50 minutes now. Maddie, thank you so much. And the way we ended it last time is because I introduced this video. You actually have to end this video.
Correct, I do. So should I do my normal outro, or do you think you're
just do your normal? Yeah, do what you think is best.
All right. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us on this video. We'd love to hear your suggestions for a BioShock 3 setting in the comments down below, and we will catch you in whatever collaboration we decide to do next. Stay sexy, stay active. I love you all. Peace.